And Eric has arrived.
Hi. Hi, Eric. Hi.
Kelly Sheen.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Frost. Nice to meet you.
I have a talk on this. I guess we can light it up.
Yeah.
So while we're getting Eric kind of set up, a slight kind of change in this very beginning part of the schedule. Jennifer Mata, are you able to be around until noonish?
I think I'm supposed to follow what Tara said and say, for you, Pat, anything.
Okay, because we're trying to
It's the
move BLM down until after the presentation with Eric, by Eric and the discussion, because we have to kind of shoehorn in Christine Jordan between 11 and 12, so close to 12 o'clock to give us some Fish and Wildlife Service updates, and she's only available between 11 and 12.
No, I should be fine, as long
Okay,
as
great.
I just have to get a turkey to a kid's school by 1 o'clock. Other than that, I'm good to go.
Okay. Well,
Multitasking.
okay. So why don't we getting Eric loaded up? Eric went to the restroom. Okay.
Okay, this is Trixie on a single screen. I have to.
Trust that all those people are back there.
I'm gonna share my, so we're gonna do a roll call.
No, we're just gonna skip the roll call.
Okay, I'm gonna have to just basically take a bunch of notes who's on here.
We can do it after, eventually.
Yeah.
Just take a screenshot, Kelly.
Good idea.
People have gotten so technologically savvy.
Okay, so is it just that PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you this back then. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna let Eric take it away.
Am I on already?
You're on already because we had to make a slight adjustment for Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay. All right. This for a second. Hold on just one moment. Do you have a, what happened? Forwarder? Don't.
Flickering mine along, or so I just to tell you to hit the,
You can just tell me
hit the button.
forward.
Yeah, there's some animations. I'll keep you busy.
Hold on. I'll share.
So while he's doing that, why don't you just introduce yourself and kind of to everybody on the screen. Most of them are behind your PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's that era still of talking to people remotely and in the room, but I'm
And
glad to
make
be here
sure the
today.
people here, Eric, okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, my name is Eric Knapp. I'm a research ecologist with the Forest Service, and I'm based in Reading. I work for the research station.
I forgot one thing. So one thing we're gonna do is Eric is gonna do his presentation. We'll hold questions. Because otherwise, my experience is we never get to the end of the presentation.
And at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions, go back to any of the points made. Yeah, I've been with the Forest Service for about 18 years now, and I work in the kind of intersection of forest ecology and silviculture. And so this presentation is compiles some of my recent experiences, dealing with the forest management, droughts, and wildfires. And I'll present some data from a host of collaborators, many of them with the Forest Service, but others as well. So next slide.
He's struggling. There we go.
So yeah, first a little background, we obviously all know this, but the forests have changed quite a bit since the old days. And these are two pictures from Central Sierra back in the 1930s. And it illustrates some of the change that has occurred. Namely, there used to be a lot of big trees. There was more space in the forest. And there was also a lot of heterogeneity that you can see in the far right picture, a mixture of openings and dense areas of forest. And so it's like when the early foresters came to and saw this type of structure in our forests, the idea was, we kind of lost it for a sec. There we go. That, well, if we just kept fire out of the system, we could grow a lot more trees. And so that became, part of the impetus for fire exclusion. And obviously we were successful. We grew a lot more trees. And so they were entirely correct. But, and I'll talk more about the consequences of growing a lot more trees. Next slide. And, obviously, this area, a lot of these forests burned a lot. And this is just a cross section of a ponderosa pine locally here is taken up by Trinity Lake, showing fire through time. And this is a cross section of a tree. You can see all the dates registering a fire, the little scars in the tree ring record. This particular piece of wood registered something over 20 different fires in a pretty short period. And the illustration on the figure shows what we call a fire history, where each of the horizontal lines is one of these cross sections of a stone. And each of the vertical checks is a fire registered by that stone. And so if you compile those over a number of different samples, you get what's called a fire history. And next, oops. So what we can see is some shifts in the fire regime. And we had really frequent fire about every 3 years. This is west of Trinity Lake, up by, you probably know this area, Telephone Ridge is where we collected these samples. Very frequent fire. About 1850, 1855, things changed. And we went to about every 12-year interval. And then at this particular site, the last fire was in 1897. So, it's a major fundamental change in the fire regime. And well, the next one. And so what I'm going to do is I superimpose here what estimate of the indigenous population size. And to me, this signal right here has a really strong indigenous component to it, because you see about 1850, obviously what happened, gold rush, native depopulation. You'll have to hit the next one. Obviously, even by the early mission period, the populations had already gone down, but then it really plummeted after the gold rush. And so there's a real, you can't actually, you never can prove these things, but there's a strong signal, and we see that in fire history studies throughout California. There's oftentimes a change around 1850. So next. So yeah, gold discovered, and then fire suppression, the policies really kicked in around 1910. So you see there's a change that occurred well before fire suppression. And I guess the point I want to make is that the fire regime had already been altered by the time we started fire suppression. Oftentimes the ills of forests today we think about, it's like, well, we started suppressing fire. Well, it's more than that. You know, we also stopped using fire to, you know, deal with the biomass accumulation that these forests can undergo. So next. Yeah, so obviously, you know, the historical fire was lightning, and in many places a pretty strong, you know, indigenous burning signal, and it aided travel, hunting, improved the qualities of culturally important plant species. Next, and a lot of our forest ecosystems are pretty dependent on fire. So next, and if you don't have fire, the forest changes. And we had an opportunity to look at this change in some plots that we have down on the Stanislaus National Forest. This is a series of plots that were put in by an early forester who is pretty well known, Duncan Dunning. He was incredibly meticulous and created these stem maps for us that when I came to Reading, I discovered in an old data drawer and decided to find these plots and see what changed. And so here, this is an illustration showing, you know, what the forest looked like. This is basically a stem map in 1929, old growth condition prior to logging. And then after the stands were mapped in fine detail, they were logged using the methods at the time, which oftentimes was kind of an overstory removal, taking out the big trees, leaving the smaller trees to come up and replace the stand. And then this is what it looks like today. And you can see that, you know, the historical forest was just a mixture of structures, different age classes in groups of trees, widely spaced trees, gaps. This is 1 acre of that map on the right. And so the same acre is on the lower panel, 2.5 times more trees. But one thing's really striking too, is that the gaps in the forest have essentially disappeared. So all of the growing space is filled up with trees. And that's pretty much, you know, it's happened everywhere in our forest. This is not new. In fact, a lot of areas, they show even greater densification than we do. You know, this forest, 127 trees per acre, is actually pretty dense for a historical forest. There's a lot of other reconstructions that show lower density than that, but this is a really productive site on, you know, fairly flat ground. Next. Well, that particular site, it had, you know, it burned about every 6 years historically. And in that site, the last fire was in 1889. So it's pretty similar to what we see in the Trinity area. And so these are just some pictures showing the forest near where we collected those fire history slabs. And you're all probably quite familiar with this look. So big trees, there's an incense cedar, a struggling black oak. You know, you can see a couple of big trees in the background here. In the right panel, you see a black oak dead down on the ground. But you notice all of these little Douglas firs have come in. Incense cedar, you know, a lot of small, more shade tolerant species have filled in the forest and obviously shaded out the black oak. But when we look at this forest now, it's hard to think that could even support a 3-year fire turn interval, because these fuels are just a different, it's more a compact fuel bed, Douglas fir needles. And so we know the vegetation has changed pretty dramatically. My feeling is that this was historically probably a much more open forest, and it probably had a higher black oak component, a lot more grasses and other things that could carry fire on a short interval like that. So, you know, major changes have occurred, and no matter where you go in forests today. Next. So, even some of the early folks, they had some hesitation with putting out all of the fires. There was a fear that, yeah, we were going to accumulate fuels. And so I like this quote from a forest supervisor in 1930 down on the Sierra National Forest. And the picture is one I pulled out of the National Archives from the Sierra National Forest, the picture taken in 1935. 21 years of protection has in many places filled up holes in the forest that many of you old timers know of comparatively large areas of almost impenetrable pole stands that were open forest then. This is, of course, as it should be, and we must be prepared to cope with the increased hazard. So, we were able to cope with that for a while, through just increased, better and better fire suppression. But then obviously things shifted, and about 1980 or so, the number of acres burned started ramping up again, despite what we suppression capabilities. So we know, there's a fuel problem. Next. So next I'll shift a little bit to, it's like, well, what do we do about this forest density and fuel problem? And when I came to the agency, one of the things I like to do is find the points of contention in forest management, and in a lot of circles, and then design studies to address some of the concerns. There was a feeling like, well, we know that fuel treatment, thinning the forest, prescribed fire, we know it works, but it was seen in some circles as in conflict with managing for other resources like wildlife habitat. When I looked at these old pictures and of historical forests that were much more open, these presumably, well, we know from the fire history studies that they were resilient to fire. We presume that they were also biodiverse, that they also provided great habitat for a host of animal and plant species. So I thought, it's like, well, can we use that information about how these historical stands were structured to guide thinning in a way that maybe does a little bit better job of creating some of the other habitat elements. And so this was a study where we attempted to do just that. These are the three old stem maps right here that we have. I showed you, one of the stem map from one of those plots in a previous slide. But around it, we put in a study where we compared a couple of different thinning treatments. One we're calling a high variability thinning treatment, where we attempted to recreate some of that patchy structure of that historical forest. Rather than thinning every tree, spacing that tree from crown to crown, we spaced the trees at a different scale. We created we left little groups of trees, we created small gaps and created a much more patchy structure. And we're comparing the outcome of that with a more standard even crown spacing treatment, which I'm calling low variability. And we have an untreated control. And then we followed up half of the units with prescribed fire, and we left half of the units unburned. And so it's a study to look at the ecological outcomes of these treatments. And we installed this in 2011. The burns were completed in 2013. Next. And just to give you a sense of what this looks like on the ground, here's one of our untreated controls. Here are two high variability thinning treatments. And you can see the small gaps that were put in, but just as importantly, we also have areas of higher density. And then here's a standard, low variability thinning where the crowns of trees are spaced relatively evenly from each other. So it's kind of a subtle difference, but it shows the different structures created there. And just, we went from 300 trees per acre to these are 10 inches and above down to 60 or so trees per acre. And the basal area 289, we dropped it down to about 165. And with thinning also increased, we were able to increase the pine basal area with thinning because in the thinning we thin the fir and cedar more heavily than the pines to accentuate that, because the historical forest we know from those old stem maps was closer to this value. It's about 35% pine. The next. And just give you an idea, some before and after photos of what this high variability thinning with prescribed fire treatment looks like. This is before logging. Pretty high density mixed conifer forest stand with ponderosa and sugar pine intermixed with fir, white fir, and incense cedar. And then in 2020, a couple of years ago, so 9 years after thinning, 7 years after burning, and you can see the difference in that stand. Before logging, a lot of these areas were sort of what I call understory deserts. There's just simply not enough light on the forest floor for a lot of plants to grow in the understory. And after a while, we stimulated some shrubs to grow, a lot more herbaceous plants, but it's not an overwhelming amount of shrubs. And you can see in areas of high density, there's enough tree canopy to suppress shrub growth. So we create this patchy mosaic of shrubs, which is similar to what those old stem maps, the early scientists also mapped all of the shrubs, and they showed that about 30% of the forest floor was covered with shrubs at that time. So almost all of them had disappeared by the time we started this study. So next. So we had an opportunity to test how these treatments performed when we had a very severe drought. It wasn't as severe up here, but in the southern Sierra especially, this is in the central Sierra, so it wasn't quite as bad. But this is a graph showing the basal area or stand cross-section area of stem and the year. So next is the thinning was done here. And you can see thinning dropped the basal area fairly substantially. Next, and we did the burning in 2013. Next, and so this is our period of drought evaluation. The drought occurred between 2012 and 2016, but oftentimes the bark beetle populations built up and the mortality is a little bit delayed. So next, what you see here is that these two treatments are the controls, the untreated and unthinned with prescribed fire only. And you see in those control treatments, we lost 23% of the basal area over that time period. In the areas that were thinned, we actually gained slightly, but it's basically flat. We lost some trees. There was some tree mortality, and a lot of this was bark beetle mortality, but it was basically balanced by growth. And so the carbon in the system was a lot more stable, and we were able to mitigate the effect of this very severe drought. So next, but we put a fire only treatment in the study, partly for the reason we wanted to see how much of that variability we could generate with fire alone, and there's also stakeholders that frequently ask us, like, why can't we thin the forest with prescribed fire alone? And so what we were able to do with fire alone in this particular study is we were able to kill about a little over 10% of the trees. That's down. And most of those were in the 4 to 10 inch diameter range. So what we found is that too few overstory trees were killed really to substantially influence the structure of the stand. When you have 2.5 times more trees than occurred historically, you have to do a lot more thinning to have a strong effect. And we were also, because we didn't kill that many trees, we weren't able to, with fire, shift the forest to more pine from fir. Once trees become larger, it's hard to really do the kind of thinning you want to do. For example, this 20+ inch fir in the foreground, it's hard to kill that fir and not kill the 35-inch pine behind it, to find that balance. So that's the challenge oftentimes we face. And if you are successful about hitting that burn window just right, where you can produce a bit more mortality and to actually thin the stand substantially, then it takes a number of cycles. Then you've killed some trees, they fall on the forest floor, then you need more cycles of fire to consume that biomass. So it's a long process, and I'm not saying it can't be done, because the National Park Service, that's their treatment in Yosemite and Sequoia, and they have seen areas where they have successfully done this, but it takes many cycles of prescribed fire oftentimes, and they tend to burn a little hotter at times to do that thinning. So, but we were able to consume 72% of the surface fuel, which obviously is a huge benefit. These are very fuel loaded systems, and you can see all the fuel on the ground here. So next, and I just thought I'd throw this one in here too. It's just I see these arguments made oftentimes about well, doesn't thinning actually make the fire hazard problem even worse, because you are opening up the stand, drying out the fuels more. There's more wind at the surface. And so we decided to test one of these aspects, at least the fuel moisture aspect, just by doing, a low budget little experiment where we just dropped fuels of various sizes. There's a 10-hour fuel stick, and a 10-hour fuel is 1/4 to a 1-inch diameter. 1,000-hour fuel or 3 to 8 inches in diameter, and then a bigger fuel, what we call a 10,000-hour fuel, which means it takes that long for the moisture to equilibrate with the atmosphere. We dropped these fuels out into the woods in areas, this is up on the Klamath National Forest, unthinned areas, and we also put them in thinned treatments that had been followed with prescribed fire. And we stuck them out in the snow. And then in the subsequent year, we followed the moisture over time in these two very different stand structures. So next. And then, we went out every 2 weeks and we weighed them. And next. And this is what I found for a few of different fuel sizes. For 10-hour fuels, essentially they, you see periods of pulses of higher fuel moisture and rainfall events, but the fuels very quickly dried out, and there was essentially no difference in the fine fuel moisture between a thinned stand and an unthinned stand. For the larger logs, there was initially the logs in the denser stand were a little bit moister. But then as you got to the main heart of the fire season, the moisture of those in those two stand structures, it came to approximately the same level. There was no significant difference here in the moisture. And that's the heart of the fire season. And the point is that with our long, dry summers and 4 or 5 months without rain, it gets plenty dry, even in the shade of an old growth forest or a dense forest. So we saw very little difference between thin and unthinned stands, and yet we didn't look at the wind speed aspect, and we know that to be the case, is that in thinned areas you would expect to see a little more wind at the surface. That's a given. Next, but another thing that thinning does is it lowers the crown pulp density. It changes the ladder fuels, reduces ladder fuels, and fire is a function of all of those factors. And if you add all of those together, the net result next is generally a reduction in fire intensity. And I read a lot of noise about this, but I think a lot of cases, all of these different factors are not considered together. And we had an opportunity to look at what actually happens with wildfire when the study area that we did the study burned 2 summers ago in the Antelope Fire. Next. So this is part of a very large, one of our large silvicultural studies where called the Goose Nest Adaptive Management Area. It's up here on the eastern part of the Klamath National Forest, where we have a big tree thinning treatment, and that treatment was intended to it kept the largest trees in the stand, and it was an attempt to grow big trees fast. We have untreated controls. We have a pine emphasis thin, where the objective of that was to push the stand to more pine dominance. We have a pine emphasis thin with prescribed fire, and that was 2 rounds of prescribed fire. And then we have a fire only treatment that was added later, 3 different units. So the thinning was done all the way back in 1999 to 2001. And each of these units is 100 acres in size and has a buffer around it. So I've been told it was this particular research project was in that year, and in those years was the largest timber sale in California. And we have 20 years of data, so it's an incredible resource. And this whole area then burned in the Antelope Fire. And so we went in starting fall before last, and we finished this summer and remeasured all of those plots to look at the effect of those forest management treatments on what the stands look like today. So next. And just to give you an idea of what these forests likely to look like historically. This is a picture from 1904 that I also found in the National Archives. And you can see, quite a bit of shrub cover on the forest floor, fairly widely spaced pine stand. But this is probably similar to what this area used to look like. Next. And at the time of the Antelope Fire, this is approximately what we had up there. I don't really have a lot of this predated my time from the Forest Service, so I had to pull pictures from different places. But untreated control, you can see the low crowns. A lot of these small trees have crowns all the way down to the ground. We had a big tree emphasis thin. This was actually taken after the Antelope Fire. I couldn't find a picture from before, a stand that happened to burn quite nicely. Pine emphasis thin. One thing you notice here is that, we emphasize pine, but look at what's coming in the understory without fire. 20 years without fire. It's like a carpet of white fir. Pine emphasis thin with prescribed fire, 2 rounds of prescribed fire, and prescribed fire only. So, the first prescribed fire killed some trees. You can see them on the ground now. And the second prescribed fire consumed some of that wood, but not all of it. So next. And so here's essentially the outcome. And we'll be publishing some papers on this, on the actual field data, but this is from satellite remote sensing, where this is the basal area mortality, unchanged from a satellite, means very little effect, is dark green. 0 to 25% basal area mortalities in light green, 25 to 75% in yellow, and 75 to 100%, or pretty much standard replacement, in red. And so we go from the untreated control, which the dominant outcome was on the other extreme, the pine emphasis thin with prescribed fire, the dominant outcome was unchanged. We had much less effect. But you can see there was some variation, because even in the untreated control, some of those controls burned right. And even where we did thinning and followed with prescribed fires, we had some areas where we had some effect. The thinning and fire only treatments were somewhere in the middle, where oftentimes what we found with the thinning treatments is that we moved the fire out of the tree crowns. But it was still, because we have 100 years of accumulated fuel on the ground, it was still a hot enough fire with, 20, 25 mile an hour winds burning at like 7% relative humidity, that it scorched a lot of the trees to the top. And so we still lost the stand. It wasn't a crown fire though. But there's a range of outcomes. There are some areas that performed pretty well. And this is a picture from one of our pine emphasis stand with prescribed fire treatments that came out looking really well. So next. So I think that's one of the values of having these adjacent plots that treated in these different ways, is because then you can really see the effect of the management on the outcome, because this is fire burning under the same conditions on the same day. For example, here is an unthinned area, and here's the boundary between with our pine emphasis than with prescribed fire. And you can see when fire came into the stand, what change the fire behavior had. You can see how the char height of the trees just declines as you go into the stand. So a pretty stark difference. Next. And so I'm just going to finish up by just showing, just give you an idea of the range of outcomes in the untreated control, and in these different. I'll go through all the different treatments, and I could say that now, after having collected the data on the ground, the field data essentially show the same thing that the pictures do. If you have me come talk again, I'll have some actual numbers for you. But oftentimes it was a crown fire. When the wind was howling, this stand density did not hold up. But there were certain areas where if the fire burned at night, we still had nice effects. And I think that can be confusing sometimes, because you see this whole range of effects. Sometimes that it really depends on the particular conditions. And under worst case scenario conditions, we have big, long crown runs in this type of stand structure. Next. Thin only, as I indicated before, many of the overstory trees were heavily damaged by crown scorch. And oftentimes what happened is this, without prescribed fire, this regeneration layer, you can see all these little sticks right there in the foreground. Those are all white firs. They torched out. It's kind of like a shrub layer. And it produced quite a bit of heat that added to the intensity of fire in this area. But so oftentimes, we've seen this from several studies, and it's been repeatedly shown in the literature too, that thinning under these kind of intense fire situations is oftentimes not enough. That you have to treat both the crown fuels and you have to treat the surface fuels for best tree survival under the worst fire weather conditions. So the range of effects, we had some areas that came out looking quite nice with it, and it's just a nice understory burn. But those were probably burned at night, or they burned in a flanking fire after the main, wind-driven fire runs. Next, prescribed fire only. This is kind of an interesting treatment, where in one of the units looks really good. A couple of the units did not come out so good, and it was a puzzler to me. I expected when the surface fuels were reduced substantially, that it would actually perform better. But one of the things, so we're still trying to unravel this. I think 2 of these units got hit under the worst possible conditions, and when we start evaluating this and putting the weather at the time of burning into our statistical models, we'll be able to pull that out better. But one thing you can see is that see these little where the down logs were that were consumed. You can see all the lines on the forest floor. The prescribed fires created some fuel, because in the thinning that I talked about before, that hadn't all been consumed by 2 rounds of prescribed fire, or the next prescribed fire didn't. And so that then was consumed by the wildfire. And so there still might have been too much fuel in the system, led to a lot of intensity. Also, with the prescribed fire alone didn't thin the stand very much. So the stand might still have been too dense for this kind of fire weather. The next. So thinning with two prescribed fires, low overall tree mortality, but even this treatment was not enough under the very worst conditions. This particular unit was hit probably under the worst of the worst conditions for that particular fire. And we see that in that area, some of the, there are quite a few shrubs that came in with, because prescribed fire will stimulate the shrubs to grow, especially when you open up the canopy. And we found that in a lot of areas that those shrubs actually seem to suppress fire behavior. That the fire would get into these shrubs and essentially stop. A lot of this was snow brush. So, the spellutinus, but under strong winds, the shrubs also became involved and produced some amount of heat. But, the dominant effect was pretty nice outcome. But one other thing about those the last prescribed fire in the stand was 11 years ago. And from fire history studies, we know that this area used to burn about every 9 years. So it was due for a fire. So that might also have been an effect, is we just needed to burn it more perhaps. So just kind of wrapping things up, it's pretty clear, that a lot of our forests are in pretty tough shape right now, with tree density and also the fuels that we have on the ground. So, and a lot of that is, when the mortality episodes we've been having with droughts and the ramp up in fire behavior is often in the media, it's attributed to climate change. And I think it's important to recognize that it's not just climate change, it's climate change interacting with excess tree density. It's climate change interacting with the excess fuels we have on the ground to create the condition, the situation we have today. So, this excess tree density and the accumulated fuels have just made our forests really vulnerable to climate change. And so if we think about it just from a climate change angle, it can seem like, well, what can we do here locally to change the outcome? But, just knowing those interactions leads you to a different outcome. It's just like, yeah, you can actually mitigate the effect of a warming climate. And we showed that on the Stanislaus National Forest. It's even in this century drought, this worst drought in multiple centuries, we were able to really slow down the bark beetle mortality if the stand had been thinned to a density similar to what that stand looked like historically. And and same with the outcome from the our plots up there on the Klamath National Forest. So and there's a real value to these side by side treated and untreated areas, because in the thinned forest, like both those thin and unthinned plots were probably getting hit by bark beetles. It's just the ones that the trees in the unthinned areas were more likely to die. And same thing in the fire areas, they were being hit by the same kind of fire behavior. And so by having these side-by-side replicated studies, we're able to really tease that out and look at the effects of forest management on these factors. So with that, there's just a lot of people that made this work happen, and I want to give a little shout out to them. And I was to have a conversation, and happy to take questions.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions. We'll have to wait till we get the PowerPoint off the screen to see if anybody's raising their hand. How about in the room here? Any thoughts, questions? Well,
You can yeah, there we go.
Am I on the floor? Okay, great. Good morning, Eric. My name's Randy Paris, and I really appreciated your presentation. I'm wondering if the Klamath Mountains are kind of finally experiencing a similar drought that the Sierras did a few years back, because the mortality is extremely extensive this year. And it's been ramping up, but it feels like it's hit a new level. And I'm wondering if you're seeing kind of in your studies the type of tree dying and the different disturbances, because it seems like with the drought, we're seeing a lot of the biggest trees in the stand die. The very trees that you think of being fairly resilient to the fire. So I'm wondering if that's something you've looked at a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's a couple questions in there to answer. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing you are, Randy, like driving over here from Reading, you see the pines and the Douglas fir going out. And so we know that bark beetles are in the system. I see also a lot of mortality around Shasta Lake, especially those low elevation areas that got getting hit by the drought the hardest. So, I don't think it's yet at the level that we had down in the Southern Sierra. In the Southern Sierra, they lost, 80–90% of the pines in certain areas. I mean, it was bad. But if we have another drought year this year, it's entirely possible. I think we have bark beetles in the system. They're going to react to a drought. And if we have another dry year, I'm worried for what we're going to see. And then a second part of your question is your observation of higher mortality in the large trees than the small trees. I see that too. Bark beetles tend to preferentially go after the big trees for one. And so that's the difference between thinning with fire and thinning with bark beetles. Oftentimes with thinning with bark beetles, you end up with just the small trees, and your big trees you're trying to save get killed. And then sometimes people have observed that the larger pines sometimes suffer more with fire, and some of that might be due to, we've all seen the pile of bark chips that builds up around some of the big ponderosa pines after 100 years without fire. Well, that never used to be the case. That's kind of a unique fuel situation for those trees. And so when that is consumed, that can girdle the trees and lead to bad outcomes. But yeah, that's just the unfortunate reality. And generally with prescribed fire, and you saw that with the results I presented in the talk, is that we generally still killed the small trees with prescribed fire. It was more like the 4 to 10 inch trees. We didn't kill many big trees.
Great. Thank you, Randy.
Great. Thank
Who
you.
else? Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Just
Keith.
Eric, I just, based on your presentation, I think you've demonstrated that a combination of treatments is more of a solution than a one size fits all. And then I would also say that when it comes, even if resiliency is your goal, there's still an opportunity in there to utilize some of that material. That excess material, it doesn't always just have to be under 10-inch biomass. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there. If you're trying to open up the canopy, there's some larger material in there. And if there's, some ground treatments that have to take place, there's opportunity there too. So I just think we should look at both of those and keep our options open to all those treatments.
Yeah, what I want to point out with that variable density thinning study we did down there on the Stanislaus is that was a timber sale. That was not a subsidized sale. There was enough volume removed to, even though we weren't marking with volume in mind, we were marking to try to create a structure. The end result is that after 100 years of excluding fire, there was so much biomass in the stand, and there were a lot of ingrowth firs that are 20 to 28 inches in diameter that we cored and that were only 80 years old, and that had come in with fire exclusion. And so is when we punched little quarter acre gaps in the forest. In some of those gaps, there was some, intermediate to larger trees were taken out. And but the same thing is when we try to space trees from each other, the residual stands tend to be kind of clumpy too. So oftentimes you have your larger trees are growing close to each other. And so in that case, when you try to space trees, sometimes a larger tree might be removed as well. But even though we didn't cut many 30+ inch trees, we cut some. But it was enough volume to pay for itself. So it was not like a restoration treatment. That's a question I oftentimes get. It's like, if you're doing a restoration, that you're going to have to sacrifice something in terms of volume, you're going to have to sacrifice, say it's going to have to be subsidized. This was a demonstration that no, that's not the case. And it could be just, that was a very productive site too. And that might not translate everywhere. Other places, there might be less volume because it has been, that site hadn't been entered since it was logged in 1928, 1929 and hadn't been entered since.
I would ask too, if we were counting on prescribed fire to be necessary in most forest settings, with our resistance to burning up cabins and people's livelihoods, is it realistic to expect that we can treat as many acres as maybe were treated naturally in the past on a 7-year cycle?
That is a really important question and one we're definitely grappling with now. And one of the things that interests me is, I have the same skepticism that you do, maybe a little more I try to be optimistic, but recognizing what I'm interested in finding out is what cycle of fire would we need to reduce the intensity and create a structures like the ones we like, recognizing that, maybe a 3-year fire return interval like you have at Trinity Lake is not in the cards. Could you achieve a lot of the same results if, say, like a fire every 10 or 12 years? Those are the questions I think are yet to answer.
Coupled with the treatment, if there's a treatment that goes ahead of that, it gives you more opportunity to do that. If we just wait for it to happen, it's going to be gone because it's burning up a little faster than we can keep up.
It's true. And one thing I have observed is that, oftentimes the toughest acres are the ones to burn the first entry after 100 years of fire exclusion. And you're oftentimes working a fire through that stand and it's extremely slow and arduous. The second entry burn can be a lot different story. In these goose nest plots, the second entry burn, we were able to burn hundreds of acres a day. And it went much, much more quickly. And so it's just like it's getting over the hump.
Okay, Carol Fall.
So it's probably a Trinity centric question and actually based on experience doing fuel reduction, doing thinning on our property. So we notice when you start thinning the trees, not only do you get higher wind speeds and stuff, but you get a lot more snow breakage. The trees that you left don't have the root support structure. So we get more trees falling over. And it's also really steep. And so it's kind of a 2-part question. Have you looked at, how this works in really heavy snow load, wet snow load kind of conditions? And have you looked at, the pictures you showed were really flat. So I'm wondering, if a fire on a steep ground had moved through those same plots, would you have expected different results?
In the fire pictures, that forested landscape that I showed you is relatively flat. But fire moves quickly with slope or with wind. In this particular case, we had wind. You can get the same result if fire moving upslope. But the nice thing about prescribed fire is that you can change that around and move the fire from upslope to downslope and take that problem away. But yeah, I think if our study site had been on steeper slopes, I think the outcomes would have been even worse. And in terms of your question of snow breakage, yeah, I mean, that's a thing that's seen pretty commonly. If you open up a stand, those trees will take a while to rebuild their crowns and be more hardened towards that wind.
Nick.
Yeah.
On a lot of the projects, especially the historical projects up here, we've tried to use canopy closure as a proxy for habitat and for a motivation of a lot of the collaborative members to sort of maintain shade for the purposes of retarding shrub growth, basically. And so that's been a big sort of focus of our conversations, sort of in thinking about sort of treatment longevity, as well as a proxy for habitat for northern spotted owl, fishers, other things. And so we have this sort of motivations to sort of set a canopy closure target and then thin pretty evenly through the stand, sort of thin from classic thin from below. And, some of our conversations are about like small modifications to the basic concept of sort of even spacing thin from below, kind of with a canopy closure target. And I've long thought that that's not a great proxy for sort of restoring sort of historical structure or resilience. And I think the other thing I saw in your talk was that, when you do this sort of more variable density thinning, you do get shrub response. When you get prescribed fire and you do get shrub response, but it's uneven, across the landscape. So it's sort of patchy. So I'd just be interested in your kind of reflections on the utility of canopy closure as a meaningful metric at all in thinking about sort of thinning for fire resilience and drought resilience. And any other reflections on just sort of the importance of shrub understory as a driver of fire behavior or stand resilience as well.
Yeah, and shrubs obviously, play an important role. They're important deer browse, and a lot of important habitat for a lot of animal species. And we know the historical forests contained shrubs, as I pointed out, and you mentioned too. But it was patchy. And the concern, I think, is creating an understory of kind of universal shrub cover, which is going to make it harder to get the next generation of trees established. And it also can become a fire issue. And I think that's something we have to watch out for and to understand what the relationship between canopy closure and shrub development is. Because if you open a forest up too much and then you have just a sea of shrubs after you do a prescribed burn, then that's also not a great situation. And that's one reason I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing from this variable thinning treatment, because we're seeing the areas where we left patches where we left more canopy intact. There's very little shrub development, even though the shrubs did germinate, they just died in the shade. And so I know there's a relationship there. A lot of these shrub species are not very sensitive to shade. So yeah, that's an interest of mine. I don't know if that's been totally worked out of what that threshold is that we're looking for, but I like the looks of the more heterogeneous stand and how the shrubs are developing in there.
Did you guys look at canopy closure in the sort of variable density stands, even though that wasn't a major sort of metric or target? You were trying to reconstruct sort of that historical stand density. What was the sort of starting net sort of canopy closure and after? Of course, any one place you stand, you don't get the sort of average measurement.
Yeah.
But do you know what it was?
We did take canopy closure measurements. We have a grid over that entire area, and we took these hemispherical with a hemispherical lens or fisheye lens, took canopy shots and analyzed that. I can tell you the canopy cover, which is different than closure, it's more of like a straight overhead, was in the neighborhood. It was between, before thinning, it was between 55 and 60%. And after thinning, it was between 35 and 40%.
And that's composite across the stand.
Yes.
Basically. So not in any one place, but stand-wide.
And the nice thing is I have a paper where I show the distribution of canopy cover and closure and how the variable stand produced a greater mix of had some very open areas, and which would be great for pine regeneration, and it had some much more closed areas. Whereas the stand that was thinned evenly had pretty much an even canopy closure, but the same canopy closure across the stand. So yeah, we are looking at those relationships. I have data from a couple of years ago at the understory response, and I have the closure data. I just haven't put the two together and analyzed it yet. But we'll have papers coming out about that.
Thanks.
I mean, just more of a comment to Nick, but I think we use canopy closure so commonly here because we're mostly communicating with and amongst people who are not forestry professionals, and those other metrics are seem so much more analytical and harder for people to understand. People can look up and understand canopy closure or canopy cover.
Well, a lot of people
more simply.
They use them interchangeably, but they are actually different because canopy closure is a kind of a cone of light.
Yeah.
It gives you an idea of the shading of a spot, based on various different sun angles, whereas canopy cover is more straight overhead, and canopy closure is oftentimes used by wildlife audiences as a target. But I think that when some people, we did an estimate of what the canopy cover was in our historical stands. And we also think that we estimated it was 36% in those historical old growth stands on a very productive site. And so that's a value that's quite low, in some, it would be kind of pretty low in some people's eyes, and I know a lot of our forest thinning, there's a target of, we want 45% canopy cover. But as I point out, is that in the historical stands, is there were areas in that stand that had zero canopy cover, and there were areas that had probably 60 or 70% canopy cover, but it was that mixture of habitats. You don't have to have high canopy cover or closure over your entire stand to create the habitat that you're looking for.
James.
So I wanted to go back, if you don't mind. So Keith was talking about treatments as opposed to burning or something. Is that what you were getting at?
No, I'm saying in combination with.
Okay. Well, I kind of came in late, so I'm not gonna.
That's okay. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Anybody else? Anybody on screen zooming in have any questions, comments? Did we see everybody?
Yeah.
Well, talking about non-professional, I have a question. Every place we go, like around the lake, they say that, well, this was oak woodland before the conifers came, and places, the southern Trinity, and every place is oak woodland. And some places are so remote, they can't really be feasibly logged because they can't justify the trucking of it or whatnot. But is returning some areas to oak woodland, is that a possibility? Is it doable? I mean, how would you keep the conifers out?
Historically, it's probably fire kept the conifers out.
Yeah, and because the oak is more resistant to fire and drought.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing they found in the Southern Sierra is some of these areas where you lost 80% of the pine, what survived was the black oak.
Yeah.
And I really feel like the oaks have an underappreciated role to play in our forests because they also break up the crown fuels. You don't really see the hardwoods, like, you know, the deciduous hardwoods crowning, having crown fire behavior. And so it's another way of breaking up crown continuity of having an oak component to your forest. Also, it's a great tree for wildlife, acorns.
And I think the lower elevations in the Weaverville Basin certainly
They're returning to.
returning to oak.
There's an area out by the lake that was California black oak, and it was 40 feet to the first limb. You know, it was in big trees. Unfortunately, that property was bought by J.H. Baxter, who makes telephone poles, and they had cut out all the oak to let the fir grow, you know.
So Chris Cole,
Hello. I was just kind of wondering if there is some kind of idea on it sounded like you were still looking into it, but for like the gap sizes to create that heterogeneous, like, you know, atmosphere, because sometimes we're working on, you know, 20-acre parcels and, you know, we're obviously thinking landscape level, but sometimes we can, you know, we get stuck where we can work, and like, does that work on the smaller scale as well? Or is it like, just, if you could just speak to the kind of the sizing and like what it takes to create that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. In our study, we used those historical STEM maps to guide what the size of gaps we were shooting for. And we found that those historical plots had, you know, gaps that were probably a tenth to a quarter acre in size, up to a half acre in size. But that there were a lot of them. So there were small gaps. And in the forestry literature, sometimes, you know, I get the comment that, well, those gaps aren't big enough to maximize, you know, growth of trees in the center. And that may very well be the case. But I think those, if you have, you know, a bunch of little small gaps, it may break up the fuel continuity in your stand better. So it's something that we decided to use the historical STEM maps as a guide in this first round.
okay, Randy.
I kind of was interested in going back to the oak question. I know I think of the opportunity to thin around oaks. You're not just preserving that sort of diversity within the stand of those shade intolerant species, but that you know, opening is good for how fire could behave in the stand when it interacts with it. And it seems like did you have a good oak component in some of the restoration treatments you were doing in the STEM maps where you were reconstructing stand conditions? And did the gap size change when you had oaks in the stand? Like, does that need to be more open than, say, the pine restoration piece? Is that making sense? My curiosity between the different stands or the different species within the stand and maybe the overall structure around them in the restoration treatments.
Yeah, well, thanks, Randy. We did have some black oak at that stand. I mean, that particular site is it averages just under 6,000 feet in elevation, so it's a kind of upper end of the black oak zone. But you know, there's evidence of tribal use of that landscape as well. We have bedrock mortars nearby, and I think that black oak was a bigger component of that stand. The black oaks weren't consistently mapped, I think, by the early foresters because they just didn't care much about oaks at that time. But we did see, when we started the thinning, we saw more residual black oaks kind of up on the ridgetop positions where you sort of expect more of a hardwood component. And they were the focus of our restoration treatment as well, the high variability treatment. We did try to accentuate some of the gaps in areas that we saw some oaks to get a little bit more of that back into the stand.
Anybody else? Thank you, Randy. Nick.
So in the study in the Central Sierra, you use that 1929 as the reference because that's when you, of course, had the sort of plot data from, you'd showed us from the Trinity data that very strong sort of signal of reduction of Native American burning with sort of first disease and then the gold rush sort of really devastating Native American communities and fire use. So do you have any sense, or has anyone sort of tried to do the work? I've seen some, the dendrochronology kind of stand reconstructions that look at, just those trees that are left on the landscape, the sort of large fir and large pine that have persisted through that whole era. We're probably missing a lot of the oak that might have been on the landscape in that pre-colonial era because it does sort of die and decompose. And so there's not a lot of evidence. Of course, you showed that photo of the sort of dying black oaks. We see that sort of everywhere in these top stands. But I'm wondering if anyone sort of tried to get at what that 3-year return interval kind of pre-colonial sort of stand structure was like, because you've got 127 trees per acre in 1929. That's almost 90 years from the gold rush, and 75 years from sort of the Spanish missions. So that's a lot of growth. There's a lot of reduction in fire and a lot of ingrowth, even to those reference plots in 1929. So I'm just curious of any kind of further backcasting beyond that helps us think about, historical stand structure. We can infer some things, I guess, but gosh, it must have been really open. I just
for that site, it's true. So, that even by 1929, that was probably pretty altered. And we see that in the pictures, lots of ingrowth of fir. But when we looked at just the larger trees in the stand, we tried to eliminate some of that ingrowth by just looking at trees that we thought may have predated 1850. And even then, I think we were down to maybe about 60 trees over 10 inches in diameter, which is still probably on the high side for a lot of forests in the Sierra. Up here, I mean, we know that the oaks and the structure, you see the stem structure of those black oaks, they're not just all growing straight up, is that they probably were more open grown, the skeletons that we see in the forest. So we can just infer that it was a much more open forest, but we just don't have the data. But I think when you combine these little tidbits here and there, there's the shape of the trees, the 3-year fire return interval, and knowing that it would be hard to burn at a 3-year interval now, we know things have changed. We know the fuel type has changed. So a lot of it it can't, it's be proven, but there's a lot of points of evidence pointing to a much more open forest. But there were still big conifers out there too. And there's in the area we did our fire history study, there's a lot of big pines out there too, and big Douglas firs.
Okay, see a hand up, Bronson Dillard or Dillard Bronson.
Hello. I'd like to ask a question about, I need some clarification on something from the presentation when you were speaking about why we can't return our forests to their previous state with just fire components. You'd said that you'd only managed with fire to treat, was it 10% or trees up to 10 dBH? Is that clear?
Well, yeah, I just gave one example from our study. We were able to, with prescribed fire alone, we killed 10% of the trees in the stand. This is in a stand that had 2.5 times more trees than it did historically. And I made the point that killing just 10% of those trees doesn't restore the forest structure. And most of those trees that we killed were 4 to 10 inches in diameter. We're in that smallest size class that we measured. So it's pretty clear. I mean, and this is typical of a lot of results from prescribed fire studies where people have attempted to use prescribed fire alone, is that it's not a one-time deal. You can't, it's hard to do with one prescribed fire. And sometimes you're going to have to burn hotter than we did in order to kill more of the larger size class material. It's not like it can't be done, but it's more challenging. And also just bringing fire back, it was a real eye opener to me how long it took the fire crews to bring fire through a stand like that. Without thinning, there was a concern that we were going to get torching and get crown involvement. It didn't really happen to the extent that was expected, but it still is just a very slow process bringing fire through that stand. So can be done. It's just more challenging.
Ellen.
Yeah, just on that note, I'm just curious what you kind of briefly mentioned the national parks are doing this. They're just having to burn hotter and it takes longer. And I don't know if you can speak a little bit just in general terms to what kind of timeframes are we talking about, and like what kind of, are they sending like a mosaic of stand replacing fire through to get that mortality, or what do you know of what that looks like?
No, I spent some time before I came to the Forest Service. I was actually in Sequoia National Park, so I spent some time in the prescribed fire programs down there, and yeah, they just tend to burn. They start burning a little earlier in the fall sometimes. Maybe when it's a little bit drier, and they even do some prescribed burns in the summer. And it's completely possible to do burning in the summer in a lot of years, but they have a better, oftentimes a better possibility of doing that because some of the areas might be bounded by granite. There's less maybe risk of doing that in those areas. But yeah, just burning a little bit hotter, but also there's just a longer history of burning in some of those parks. I know in Sequoia, they've been doing burning for on 5-6 decades now.
Great. Okay, anybody else?
I see one hand.
It's that same one.
Okay.
That was who just asked the question.
Okay.
I guess I have one more if no one else is going to go.
Go ahead.
And it's sort of piling on to that, but it's really sort of thinking about just fire on the landscape, right? We've had this massive amount of fire, mixed severity fire, across the Klamath Mountains and in Trinity County. And we've seen sort of repeat, right? We're like getting back into a frequent fire return interval just by our lack of ability to suppress fires, largely, right? It's just sort of overwhelmed our technical and sort of human capacity to manage. So big fires, free roaming on the landscape, doing what they do. 2008, we had big fire year. Monument Fire burned through a lot of that same footprint in 2020 or 21, I guess. And we saw sort of mixed severity with a really high sort of incidence of, low and moderate severity in 2008, reburning through that same landscape. Stuff's died, things fall apart. You've got this pretty heavy fuel loading, even in places where you had low or moderate severity fire prior. Then you have these radiating high severity that's created by all that heavy fuel that's sort of left behind from the prior fire. So I'm thinking about like our ability to burn our way into resilience versus, the extent to which we need to sort of physically remove those stems to the extent we can. to create a condition which sort of fire can burn at low and moderate severities consistently, including under sort of midsummer, late summer conditions. And I'm just interested. I see us losing more and more of the sort of stands that are making it through the first entry fire, and so I'm just interested in your kind of reflections. Like I'm trying to imagine, like on the Monument Fire footprint, like how we're not going to mechanically do anything across most of that landscape. And so it is going to burn itself into some new form of resilience. I'm just interested in your reflections on sort of our ability to use fire as a tool. I'm not just prescribed fire, but sort of managing wildfire strategically to kind of get us back into, structurally diverse sort of forest where we actually do retain some of that large conifer component and this sort of mixed conifer sort of condition we have across, so much of this landscape.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I did mention. I really focused on prescribed fire, and there are some opportunities in this landscape, and like you say, there's a lot of it is burned recently, and a fair amount of it at beneficial severities. And I think in some areas, we're starting to be able to chew through that accumulated down fuel to get to a more resilient state. In a lot of areas, we probably have a ways to go. And but that's probably the way that things are going to get treated in some of these, especially steeper parts of the country. But yeah, I don't know what to really say beyond that. But one of the advantages you have in this part of the landscape is that when you have these big fire events, you tend to get inversions that cap the smoke, and then what burns underneath the inversion tends to burn at a lower severity. It's obviously a nightmare for those of us living underneath it, but some of the effects you get are more beneficial. And we've actually shown that in some studies that in the big fire years, we actually get better effects. So if we focus on the number of acres burned, we're kind of missing the ecological effect. It's because of the smoke capping the inversions and getting all of that beneficial burning.
Need enough fire to create enough smoke to create that inversion effect to moderate fire behavior.
Well, you can take advantage of that. I've always thought it's like one way forward might be to take advantage of this mosaic that's starting to develop on the landscape and start doing some bigger scale burning to basically use the black that we have to be able to burn some of the areas that we really have a lot of fuel that we want to maintain that forest. I mean, we have opportunities in this landscape to do that. But we have to be maybe more nimble in our thinking.
What size do you think the historic fires were? As far back as you can imagine.
That's a really good.
Casting gets you stuck in the bushes, so I know what that means.
Yeah, well, one thing you notice on that fire history diagram is that when the fires were burning really frequently,
much smaller. Right?
They looked to be pretty small. It was really patchy because the fuels, when it burns every 3 years, the fuels, the fire just goes out in a lot of areas, and it's self-limiting. And then you saw the difference between all of a sudden when you change the interval to every 12 years, there's fuel continuity across the landscape where all of a sudden now every tree was getting scarred in every fire. And so it shows that all you had to do is change the fire return interval to 12 years to get fire that spreads over a much broader area. And obviously now we have much greater fuel continuity, and if we didn't have suppression, it would spread, forever. So
because we're having 1 million acre fires, and that doesn't seem very natural to me.
No, and we looked at the old fire records. I was able to find the data from the national forests in California of every fire registered from 1911 to 1924. when we looked at the forests of Northern California and found, I think the largest fire in that 13 years was in the neighborhood of like 35,000 acres. That's with we didn't have fire retardant airplanes then. We didn't have the suppression infrastructure.
Bulldozers.
So something's changed.
Yeah. Cool. Great. Well, Eric, thank you very much. I have one last question. You have any research projects in Trinity County?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The study up there by Trinity Lake where we happened to find these old stumps. It was fortuitous because I happened to be working with the Shasta Trinity National Forest in the Lake Forest Plantation project where we're monitoring prescribed burns that are being introduced into plantations, trying to figure out how to get fire into stands more quickly.
Mhm.
And so we're burning plantations. And Randy Paris was involved in that work when she was with us. But we introduced fire into plantations that are range in age from like 22 to 35 years, trying to figure out the best way to bring fire back into these stands and get the effects we want to. So we're monitoring those. So far, the results look really encouraging, and we should have a paper out pretty soon on that.
Cool. Maybe another time you can come and talk to us about that then.
Yeah, I have a presentation about that.
Okay, well, again, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming all the way up.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to see all of you and thanks.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, so kind of going back to our agenda, so Jennifer, are you, yeah, there's Jennifer. How about some BLM updates?
We will see if my camera is gonna hold out. I keep getting told I have low bandwidth. So I guess just a few updates. Wanted to let everybody know we signed the DNA for the Weaverville Community Protection Project. So that's 414 acres of roadside and property boundary treatments in the community forest. So that was signed. So hopefully we'll get that project underway here soon. And the only other update is our resource management plan. So we continue to work through alternative development. Our cooperating agencies saw draft alternatives development at the end of last month. And so we just continue to work forward on that. And I think that's it from BLM.
Okay, any questions for Jennifer? And you've got some other folk on I think on the call if they had questions for them. Anybody, anything? No? So is it starting to smell like a cooked baked turkey yet?
Yes, Thanksgiving #1. I have to cook another one next week for the office.
Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks,
Have a-
everyone.
Okay. So we monkeyed with our schedule so that we could have Fish and Wildlife Service have a little bit of time to give us an update, but we got a message that they aren't available. So we're ahead of schedule. US Forest Service, the National Recreation Area Trinity Lake Vistas Project. I believe Todd Hamilton is going to cover that, right, Todd?
I believe so. Yeah, Sarah couldn't make it. She's got a sick kid, so you guys are stuck with me instead.
Okay, well, go for it.
Cool. Can I share something? It's not as great as Eric's by any means, but I think photos will help a little bit.
Yes, you're free to do so.
Share away.
Let's see if I can actually do this.
The big green button down there.
Cool. I'm assuming it's showing now.
Yes.
It is.
Cool. So Trinity Vista specifically will be the subject matter, but it's part of the overall. There were 6 total areas that we had treated. So we had North Shore, which is just south of, it's kind of off the map here, just south of Carville. We took care of. There's a spot kind of Lewiston Vista or near south end of Mary Lake. The Tanbark area, Osprey. But this is what we have left. So Trinity Vista is specifically the one that we have remaining. It was held up for a bunch of reasons. I won't go into details, but that has been resolved. And so we can now focus back our attention to this last remaining vista. So this is what it looks like now. So if I were to go to that site on the map, go to the deck and overlook, you can not really see the lake. You can kind of see the, is there a question?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
How much lake to see.
So that's kind of what it looks like now. The proposal is to essentially, from that point, do like a 90-degree angle of view. And essentially we're estimating approximately 20 trees, less than 28 inches in diameter, and we'd go out approximately 300 feet into that unit. It's less than 2 acres total. We'd want to retain some of the hardwoods if we can. I was glad to hear some of that conversation earlier about hardwood retention, and it's kind of neat on the landscape. We're looking at, once those trees are felled, there was no removal included into this. So as much as we can, we take, the guts and feathers, so the tops, the branches, and as much material as we could, up to 10 inches, pile that to be burned, but leaving the boles as close to the forest floor as possible, and essentially not jackstraw to top one another. But to give you an example of what we've done in the past, this is the photo of the Lewiston Vista on the left before we had done kind of what I had just proposed. And then on the right is after it had been completed. So a couple of big trees are still in there. You can still see some of the hardwoods. But now you can a little bit better of a vista. And then this is the North Shore one that's just south of Carville there. Again, just illustrating before at the top, and then after we had done some of the tree removal at the bottom. So again, the hardwood you might be able to see here kind of is the same as that one. A couple trees that we left in part of the view. It's just the bole. It's not a bunch of branches, so why not leave it there? And so that's just kind of quickly what I wanted to, how do I stop? There we go. Okay. I assume this was somewhat of a refresher. I didn't want to go into great detail, but at least let you know we're pulling the trigger to move forward on thinning the Trinity Vista site, in the near future.
So do you have to complete NEPA, or are you ready to actually implement?
NEPA is signed and we're ready to implement.
Okay, cool. Any questions for Todd?
Hey, Todd, this is Keith. How long did it take you to put together the NEPA for cutting 20 trees?
That actually wasn't long. It's only like a 2-pager, so it's a letter to the file. It's low-level NEPA. What really took the most time was resolving the other issues with the Pettyjohn sale and the northern spotted owl stuff. We didn't want to have this little 20 tree project conflict with a much larger project, so just wait on it. And then once that was done, it really was only a couple days.
Good.
Good. Great. Anybody else?
So I had a question about the other ones. Is there a maintenance return interval for the other ones? Like, cause that's been about 7 years since you did the one at Osprey.
It has been a while. In reading the document, they do talk about, retaining some of the trees that are less than 6-inch diameter, for example, at a spacing of, 35 or 25 to 35 foot. Now we know that's going to grow up and go right back into your vista again. So I did not see a hard date for a return interval, but I would assume that we're going to maintain that vista. I just don't know when, right? How many feet is it growing per year to where it's going to obstruct that view? I think we're probably pushing it. What are you seeing out there, Carol? Like, need to get out there the next 5 years, you think, or
Yeah,
a
I
little
mean,
bit longer?
Yeah, it's growing back. So, yeah, so there's no new NEPA done is that maintenance covered in the NEPA that was done back in 2014, 15?
Correct.
Okay.
Now this is up to leadership, so this is kind of my perception, and take that with a grain of salt. The Vista was put in place and that decision had been made long ago. So all we're doing is maintaining that decision that was already made. So with the existing NEPA, I would anticipate that we're going to maintain it as that Vista, as was decided long ago.
So Tanbark is, they've decommissioned, Tara will correct me, they've decommissioned Osprey. They took the dock and the sign out of Osprey. And so now the real Vista is at Tanbark where the picnic tables are. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to make sure long-term that's going to get maintained. And Tara's got her hand up, she'll correct me.
Go ahead, Tara.
Thank you.
Nope, Carol, I would not presume to correct you about anything going on up north. As a matter of fact, you're the person I call when I want to know what's going on up north. So I just was going to, Todd, how are you planning on implementing it? And if we're doing it in-house, let me know, because I can make folks available to go get that done. Rather than having it sitting out there.
I think we'll be chatting here soon between our crew who's available, 20-man shot crew. I cut the previous 4. I'd like to continue that as well and be involved. And then, of course, anyone else in your shop who'd be willing to help out, as long as we don't have too many fallers, within striking distance of each other. We'll have to figure that out. But yeah, we'll do it in-house, and I appreciate any of the help you're offering.
Yep, sounds good. So let me know.
Great. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Next thing up is actually Tara and kind of an update on our October field trip. Whatever you call that, big bar, big burnt.
Big ranch. Big ranch,
Okay.
big ranch project. I'm really, the field trip itself was really beneficial for me to get out and really look at some of those things. I've assigned a forester to it now to kind of start refining some of the maps so that I can, get you guys some more information and we can go a little bit more in depth as we work through it. He's going out. So it's funny. I sent him out. I want you to go identify any oak woodland opportunities, get those on a map, look at the meadow, any meadow enhancement opportunities that we can do. Let's make sure we show where the power lines are going through, some of those things. So then when we look at it, we can have some of that information right at our fingertips. So since I last saw you, I reported back to Rachel how the field trip went. We've got the Big Ranch project is on the program of work. We're planning the surveys and trying to make sure we have all the money we need to get the surveys done. But things are looking good for collecting data kind of across that landscape in FY23 and sitting down to write an EA that's around the 20 to 40,000 acre size for a year in 24, and then looking to start implementing the first pieces of it in 25. So it's also a really having that big of a footprint will give us the ability to have Trinity County and our partners and us be more competitive for some grants from the state for just different funding opportunities to get a lot of work done on a landscape in an expedited fashion. So that piece is all went really well, and that's where I'm at now. I've got it on the program of work for the forest. It's definitely one of the priorities, one of the higher priorities, and I've got a forester assigned to start going out and doing some of that to get us a little bit further down. Instead of the 100,000 foot level we were looking at it, start giving us some opportunities and looking and seeing what the collaborative is looking for. So That's what I had on the field trip. We're also, we've switched into fuels mode. So you want a general update or you want me to stick just to this topic?
Just to this topic at the moment.
That's what I
So-
had. You have any questions?
Well, yeah, any questions or comments from the people, especially who were on the field trip? So, Tara, my recollection was at the end of the field trip, we talked about getting together some maps and sitting down and starting to talk about that a little bit more. Is that still in the works in one form or another?
Yes, so that's what I've got Cody doing, kind of digging down a little bit deeper to get us a little more information so we can have those conversations. We will have it as a hybrid meeting. So once I get some more layers of the GIS map built, I'll likely just work with Kelly. Kelly and I talked about it, get those mailed out to people. I like to hold maps in my hand. I know Arnold really likes to hold maps in his hand, and get those shipped out to people so that we can all kind of look at it and have it in real time. And then that'll be our next, instead of a field trip, we'll just do a hybrid, Zoom meeting or something where we can all work together and collaborate on that whole giant project area.
Okay, so just a comment for Cody is that on the RCD website, there is a downriver fire management plan that was written by Kenneth Baldwin a number of years ago that might have some utility. It has power lines mapped on it and things like that.
Absolutely. And I did, I have some other meetings I'll have to have. I'll be meeting with our tribal partners, and I'll also be chatting about the project with with Amelia as the Fire Safe Council, and then also working with the Willow Creek Fire Safe Council, because as you know, it drops down in there behind Salyer.
Yeah, and we were just out there yesterday. Larry.
Yeah, I didn't want to let the opportunity go by without thanking Tara for that. That was probably the best field trip the collaborative's ever had. So thank you for putting that together. Very informative. Lots of great discussion took place.
Yeah, it was really great. Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, thank you, Larry.
Anybody else? And if not, well. So the next agenda item, I had sent an email to Sheriff Saxon, didn't get a response back, but do we have any updates on illegal grows? Okay.
Channel 7 News had a feature story on grows in Shasta Trinity National Forest this morning on the news.
Really? Okay. Okay. Okay, now back to Forest Service updates. We're really zooming along ahead of schedule, about an hour ahead of schedule. Who do we have from Six Rivers? Is Lejean back on?
I saw him on there, come in earlier.
Yeah, I'm here, Pat, but Bronson Dillard is with us. He's our acting ranger for the day, for this week. He'll be reporting out for Mad River.
Okay, so Bronson.
Hello, this is Bronson. Sorry, I'm trying to get this device to work. So I'm acting ranger for the week for Kristen Lark. We're going to keep it real brief. She asked that we give a shout out to the TCR CD for the road work that was done on 27 and 03 and the 29 and 30. It came out real nice. Looks good. Sure. Asked that we go ahead and announce that we've created a Firewise committee in the Mad River region. Nancy Kieran, Chad Heaton, and Jeff Myers are going to be on that. It's for basically for addressing concerns and from the community, and kind of get a community-based group going to address those types of concerns and bring us all together on that. With that said, I am just a placeholder at this moment and just taking notes so I can pass it on to the powers that be. So that'll be the end of my report.
Okay, so I think Nancy Curran had mentioned just other project stuff is I think you guys have had some work going on with RAC funding with the Watershed Center. Three Rivers, Three Forks project or something like that.
We do have multiple projects going on. Some of them are RAC funded, others are appropriated funding. A number of those agreements with Watershed Center and TCRCD are expiring come March. She's working very diligently to spend that money and get that work done on the land at this point. I don't have her numbers for how much acreage has been treated since the last meeting, but it's ongoing. So the season hasn't ended as of yet.
Okay.
Larry?
Go ahead, Larry, you got something?
Yeah, I talked to Kristen Lark recently, and she informed me that the collaborative planned acre woods was sold to Humboldt Redwoods Company. So I thought that was good news that the rest of the collaborative would want to hear.
Yeah, great. Okay. If nothing else, then back to Shasta Trinity, Tara and whoever else. Other updates?
Todd, did you want to go first? Do you have any updates on your Trinity camps or anything?
I didn't have any plans. If you guys wanted me to chat about something, I'm not sure how much more there is to update for Trinity camps. Well, I guess there's one. So I guess I'll go first, Tara. Thank you. I'll make it brief. Talk myself right into it. Trinity Center Airport and the FAA has basically said you're out of compliance and you got to thin some stuff. So they've gone through PACE engineering, did some fancy drone flights, and have determined a whole lot of trees in the flight path that need to be mitigated, removed, or whatever. I kind of see two phases to this project. One is kind of in the immediate facility where it's just kind of like what I'd say mowing the lawn and just maintaining that stuff. The other part is a little more complex. It's that pathway in and out on the north end that is getting into some of the larger trees north of Swift Creek and in the Campground of America permitted campground in there. So we might be taking that more complex phase of the airport and putting that in with Trinity camps and then not doing the analysis for that and just doing all the campgrounds as well as that complex piece at the airport as one. That's the only, I think, update, kind of a thought process and that's new to this group. So unless there's, yeah.
So the trees at the north end of the runway, are you talking about both on the south side of Swift Creek and on the north side of Swift Creek? So the ones on the north side between the creek and the KOA would have to be removed?
Yeah, so the stuff north of the creek, just to kind of oversimplify, would be that second phase that will add into the campgrounds. All the trees south of the creek are small enough and it's kind of de minimis activities that we're going to authorize them just go ahead and do what they got to do. So it's some cottonwoods, maybe on the banks, no trees over 10 inch, some woody shrubs, things like that.
And that would be able to remove then, I mean, time frame wise, I guess, when are you still looking at the scoping document for Trinity camps? And then would those trees on the north side be folded into that?
Yeah, so the project initiation letter, which is just kind of a formal collection, getting a team together, has been essentially signed off or to be signed off, supposedly today or early next week. The actual scoping document, and speaking with our NEPA coordinator on Wednesday, she doesn't want to put it out over the holidays. And so she's thinking just put it out in January in the next year. there's no point in scoping if folks are enjoying family time and friends and so forth. So that's just kind of the game plan unless we hear concerns otherwise.
But you could put the removal of the trees or the thinning of the trees on the south side of the creek into the hopper earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. So that we're looking at is just a letter to the file, no scoping required. Essentially just authorizing them to maintain the standards as mandated by FAA.
Yeah, we have pilots up here who are going to be really glad to hear that can get done, because it is pretty gnarly flying in and trying to drop down, decrease elevation on that north end of the runway when there's trees in the way. The wheels are almost touching.
We were doing a site visit and actually got to see a float plane with wheels come in. I'd never seen a float plane with wheels. And it kind of was just as you described, hovering over the top, and then he just kind of had to drop down. I think he had like a puddle jumper type thing. You could do that. I don't think another plane would be able to pull that off like he did. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, because it worked.
Unless
It worked,
you're a
yeah.
pilot. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Todd. Okay,
Yeah,
Todd.
thanks a lot.
All righty. So pilot, the marking is done, the cruising is done. We're just doing some final checks with our partner to make sure everything is lined up, and then we'll start putting all of that together and deciding the best way to move that project forward, whether it would be an IR. So we could, you guys know there's a lot of options, right? That you can sell it as a timber sale, you can do it as an integrated resource timber sale contractor, you can do it as a integrated resource service contract, or you can put it into a spa. There's like a whole bunch. If you have a bunch of money, you can throw money at it and get more acres done. So we're going to find out the value we have to start working with, and then we'll work our way through some scenarios after that. I'm happy to say the Carville thinning got done. Helicopter 506, their staff on the helicopter was downstaffed, got out there along with a few of our other fire folks. Worked some long days and got all that thinning done. So that's been in and done. So that was fun. And then the rest of the folks on the South Fork side have been mobilized into a fuels crew, and they're out doing light site prep. So the hand thinning out in the August complex. So it's a good time of year to use a hand crew to do that stuff, because when it just rained, you can't get equipment out on the wet soils anyway. So we've kind of switched in our focus, and we're doing a lot of fuels work right now. We also burned 20 acres yesterday, so that was good. It went well, and it's in patrol status. We've got people checking on it, and so I was thrilled to get that done. Want to give a shout out and a thank you to the RCD for helping us get the word out that we were going to be burning. It's always nice to share that on several different avenues. So thank you for that. Let's see. I'm working on the draft for the Good Neighbor Authority with Trinity County. I'm supposed to have that done by the end of the month. So I'm hustling to get that done and have it be pretty broad so we can do a lot of things under that. Also trying to plan to get the disaster money spent and to get as many acres accomplished and fuels reduction done in those fire footprints as we possibly can. So August is coming together pretty well because we had some NEPA already done. August phase 2 NEPA will be signed by the end of the year. That'll give us a lot of places to go. The Forest Service is getting some new contracting tools. So we'll be able to put a lot of that work into a really big contract to get, for instance, the timber sales that didn't sell. Those are already kind of packaged and ready to go. We can just put those into contracting and those treat those like service contracts. And then so I'm still working my way through the other fires and disaster supplemental funds. Let's see. Those are probably the biggest, and hiring. So I'm up to my eyeballs. We're doing SAF hiring right now, and trying to get that submittals due today. I've got we're trying to pick up. Got to fill behind Randy, so we're trying to fill behind Randy and fill behind Logan. So that's 2. Then adding 2 additional foresters, so that's 4. adding 2 additional technicians out in the woods, so that's 6, and then 2 interns. We're trying to get a couple of interns picked up that are still in school and get them on board. And once they come out here and see all the good work we're doing, we're hoping we can get them to stick around and stay and work for us. So a lot of hiring going on. We did successfully hire 2 archaeologists, so they should be on board by the end of the at the end of the calendar year, 1st of next year. I think that's pretty much the big ticket things. You know, want to thank the community and and Shasta County and all. Trinity County and all the good work that got done. With the emergency situation we had there in town and behind our office. Just so thankful to be in a small town where everybody kind of takes care of each other. I also know that incident reached up north, and I know, so Carol, I want to thank you and all of your responders for just helping keep the community safe and rallying the troops. And it's one of those moments you never want to go through, but if you're going to go through it, you want to be in a small town. So just wanted to thank everybody for that, for everything you guys did.
So Tara, didn't you hire a brushing crew?
Yes, thank you. For the first time, we've switched to, instead of just hiring firefighters in the summer, we've brought on 6 people we'll start at the first of the year, 6 people on the TRMU side, 4 people on the South Fork side. We're going to make those guys into a crew and go out and continue to just work through the winter. Also with the disaster funds, I'm authorizing a lot of work and doing things that we haven't done before. You know, renting shears, renting equipment, putting a lot. At some point soon, I'll report out on how much money we've put into our partnerships. We're looking to increase our ability and to broaden those umbrellas in our agreements so that our partners can help us get more work done. So all of those things are moving along. And I think, by the time field season hits next year, we'll have more tools and more money in place to get a lot more things done. And I think this is a really good time in the agency's history to actually, and for Trinity County to actually start turning the corner to get acres treated ahead of time and get us in a much more resilient state. Really appreciated what I caught of Eric Knapp's presentation. And in that large footprint, I'm happy to hear that we're kind of in line and in step with what he's seeing as well. And look forward to getting us out there as we start talking about potential treatments in that same footprint.
Great. Questions for Tara or comments? No? So Tara, somewhere along the line, you and I probably we should catch up on the field trip we took yesterday with Willow Creek Fire Safe Council.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I would appreciate that. We had our after action review from what happened last week. Yes.
But it was a good field trip, so I'll fill you in.
And
Great,
thanks to Tim Ritchie. I mean, it came up at the Fire Safe Council meeting whether or not there was any kind of NEPA for that road, and we had the information from him within like 10 minutes. It was just like, whoa, okay, on top of it. So that was great information. Thank you.
Great. I'll make sure and let him know it was appreciated, and we're trying to be more responsive. We're getting there.
No, you did great. Okay. Wow, we're to other items, partners. Let's see, do we have anything to report on from the Recreation Committee? It was kind of a
bust.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a meeting. So
no update on the Minersville boat ramp, really. I guess it's still in grants and agreements to contract, sorry, for the engineering firm to do the design.
Right. And I guess the only other thing would be Bowerman Barn has a rack proposal for fixing the foundation.
Yeah.
Okay. So RCD. That'd be
Chris, you want to go ahead?
Chris?
Yeah, I can start us off. So currently we have 17 crew members on, and layoff's going to be December 15th. So that would be the last of the at least full crew, and we'll probably bring on crew members as needed throughout the winter, and hopefully to facilitate burning with our partners with the Forest Service as well as the BLM. We haven't, since the last meeting, we haven't done any work on our Browns Phase 3 project that's been held up, but it's expiring, and so we're working on amending it to just extend the time and see what we can do with those funds. We've been active in the Guy Covington project area with our RAC funding that we got this year, and that project's just about done, and that's mostly work on federal ground as well as SPI ground, as where it was immediately adjacent, and just to improve the ingress egress in that area. So that's just about done. And then we've also mostly on BLM with our CAL FIRE Forest Health Grant, we've completed around 70 acres under contract, which is the first time the RCD has hired outside contractors, but it's gone pretty smooth. And they're going to be moving on to some more work, and that's in the Reading kind of Indian Creek area. The first area is just off of Highway 3 and Reading Indian Creek Road, and then the other area is kind of just farther down the road, and that's going to be another 100 acres. That's all hand treatment cut pile that'll be burned probably next fall. A lot of it's just, and then we're just planning on continuing to facilitate and assist where we can with the pile burning. I know the Forest Service has a ton, and we would have been out there this week, providing crew members to help get even more acres done, but we had some time constraints on our end with some grants closing. We did, I guess it's not on federal ground, but it's pretty important county-wide, is we did submit to the McConnell Foundation. We talked about it at the last meeting, and we did submit a proposal, and we were granted that proposal. And so we're moving forward. I think the contract will be signed either early next week or this week, maybe later today. And so that's to basically do all the planning and project design on a bunch of SPI ground as well as private ground and the North Lake area as well as surrounding Weaverville. And a lot of it's kind of the eastern side of Weaverville, kind of the private piece that sort of connects with the Weaverville Community Forest. And so it's a large project. I think it's like a $10 million budget. We're just taking care of the planning portion of that, but that'll probably tie into future plans with the Forest Service and as well as the BLM. We've at least started the talks with CAL FIRE. It's just became recently aware that CAL FIRE has done CEQA on some federal ground within the Shasta Trinity, but primarily within the recreation area around Shasta Lake. And what they were able to do was perform CEQA, and then the Forest Service was able to use that CEQA and then do a decision memo to kind of maybe not bypass the NEPA process, but to do a more abbreviated form of NEPA because of the previous analysis. And it's something worth discussing, maybe not in this meeting, but just for people to be aware of that they've been successful so far in doing that. And it might be an avenue for the RCD as a lead agency to potentially take on some more environmental compliance without doing a third-party NEPA. It's just another option that has the potential to streamline some of the compliance that ends up holding up projects. I think that's basically all I really have for an update. Kelly probably has more stuff, but.
Great, thanks. Any questions for Chris? No, Kelly, anything?
I did want to mention that we are working with the State Lands Commission. Some of you have probably already heard some of this through some of the other meetings that we've had recently, but we're in talks with the State Lands Commission to, I guess, create an MOU between the RCD and the State Lands Commission to do management of a 160 acre piece of property that's on the eastern portion of the Weaverville Basin that's adjacent to some of the area that we're working with SPI on to do work basically maintaining that piece of property, which has not seen any real management for a long time, I would say. And is kind of like a link to kind of connecting in a lot of the work that we're doing elsewhere within the Weaverville Community Forest, because it kind of closes the gap on that eastern part of the basin. So that MOU is being drafted now by the State Lands Commission, and we'll be meeting with their forester out of Santa Rosa the Tuesday, the 29th of this month, to have a closer look at it with them to see if there's any opportunities for a potential green timber sale, and talk about some of the actual specific treatments that we will be proposing and tying in with some of the other work that we're partnering with SPI on. So I think that's basically it for me today.
Okay. Any questions for the RCD? No? Okay. I see the Watershed Center somebody's on. Who we got from the Watershed Center can give us some updates? It says Watershed Center plus High Palm VFD.
Hi, so we've got a couple of us from the fire program on.
Okay.
So I don't think we'll be able to do like a super Watershed Center wide update. But when's the last time you got an update from the fire program?
Probably never.
Okay, well, I think we were able to burn prescribed fire on private lands, I think upwards of 120 acres this fall. And that's with people from TCRCD, 2 local volunteer fire departments, and 3 different, I believe, statewide partners coming and supporting from kind of our statewide training programs, some crossover there. So, and it was about, I think it was over 100 participants total between all the 6 different live fire days. So that was both really great fire on the ground, good effects and everything, great burn window this fall, and also really awesome training opportunities and cross-pollination that happened. Quaylen, can you think of anything else?
We've also wrapped up about 600 or 700 piles north of Weaverville about a week and a half ago. And that was treating, I believe, 16 acres.
Yeah, it was very dense.
And we have another pile burn happening where the monument fire was held on Hidden Valley Ranch down by Highway 36. And we also have about 120 acres on Jackass Ridge ready to do broadcast burn when the window opens up for us again there in the middle of Weaverville.
So yeah, that's the implementation side in terms of like big grants and big statewide projects and things. We're not actually the people, but we can come back with a better report next time.
Okay, well, great. Any questions for Watershed Center? No, anybody else, any updates? SPI got anything in particular?
Nothing in particular,
No?
not for the collaborative.
Okay. Anybody, anything else? Bob?
So I didn't see where else to chime in on this. The proposed third Friday field trip in December,
Yeah,
has that gelled?
no.
So what we were working on, and it sounds like we have agency availability, would be to, we've been trying to get together a multi-agency just field tour to have discussions, after today's informational presentation from Eric Knapp. We wanted to basically be able to get out on the ground and talk with and be able to look at Brown's phase 3, Brown's phase 1, what's been working for us within the community forest, and bring, both the, I know that we did do something of a field trip back in, when was that, August?
Yeah.
That basically touched on those areas, but we wanted to bring the BLM in on that conversation as we're working towards more implementation and the specifically the Oregon fire, the Oregon mountain timber harvest that the NEPA is kind of working towards. So what we were trying to pull together was, again, like a combined, Weaverville Community Forest Steering Committee meeting with, both of those relevant agencies to talk about, some of the more recent treatments that we've had, timber sales that we've, had some success with, look at the on the ground so that we can speak, towards like what's working, what's not working, so we can get, some information to the BLM about like what's acceptable, what, where we want to go with specifically the Oregon Mountain, in the shorter term, the Oregon Mountain timber sale, as well as just future treatments. So that's kind of what we were hoping to do for that December meeting on the standing third Friday.
Second. Oh, third Friday.
It'd be the third Friday, the 16th.
Right. Gotcha.
So does that sound acceptable to people?
Got a hand up from Arnold.
At the end of the so-called Big Ranch tour, we talked about that field trip day, and Tara or the group kind of agreed that it's kind of chancy scheduling a field trip in December. And so Tara suggested we save that date for, in case it's needed, to do the map looking at meeting that she talked about, which could focus on the Burnt Ranch Big Bar area, or it could focus on all the areas Kelly was just talking about. But it seemed to the group, it seemed more likely that it should be an indoors meeting, or at least people ought to hold out the probability that it would be an indoors meeting rather than a classical field trip.
Yeah, and we took that into consideration, but knowing the sort of timeliness of needing to get getting information to the BLM, I figured that we could plan for that, and then that would be an excellent fallback. If the weather was not conducive to actually getting out in the field.
Yeah. So yeah, my information's a month old. So listen to Kelly first.
Okay.
Tara, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that's fine. The other thing we can do is just plan on, it may make sense if we get a bunch of pictures, so that if we did have to be inside because the weather wasn't conducive then, if you get pictures of the stops that you wanted to make, we could maybe at least take that topic on in a hybrid fashion as well. I'm just committed to getting Arnold another map because it made him so happy. I'm going to get him another one.
Okay.
Sounds good. So we'll work towards that.
I'm going to break with the agenda briefly. I see that it looks like Ross is getting ready to bolt from the room. And this is my last meeting as the facilitator. And I have something to give to Ross, which you guys can't really see very well on the screen, but to thank him for his persistence in trying to harvest the low-hanging fruit called the first 1 mile of the Around the Lake Trail. And I just have a pair of bicycling socks for him.
Oh. If I could only ride my bicycle.
Well, you can at least wear the socks.
Yes, I can wear the socks.
So anyway,
and I guess to that, to touch on that.
Yeah.
Also with as far as you've had your kind of last foray here facilitating this group, I wanted to thank you very much for the years of service and all the work that we've done together. You know, keeping this group on task, and I think, you know, we've grown a lot, and I think things have you know, really been largely helped by just your general knowledge of, you know, all of these different, you know, arenas and different disciplines, and it's been fantastic, you know, having you as a mentor. So thank you very much for all the, you know, effort you put into this. And just for the larger group, I have started discussions with, you know, a potential replacement. I guess you can't be replaced, but I'd say that'd be, you know, someone else that could come in that I hope, you know, will be potentially a good person to sort of take on the mantle. I'm not sure exactly on how that timing is going to work, so it may end up being me for the January meeting, but we'll be, you know, in contact with people about that. And again, thank you very much for all your efforts and everything that you've done to really make this group work.
Well, thank you.
You're here, Pat.
Mostly my pleasure. Thank you. There's one meeting that I wish never happened, but anyway, I think we were talking about a wilderness bill. And it's not like I'm gone. I mean, I'm still around, so, you know, people can certainly call on me when you're wanting that, you know, I remember when kind of help. It's been great working with everybody. I started doing this. I promised Shiloh I would help him out for a few months in 2015. And now it's 2022. Last thing though, I would say is there any agenda building for January? Things that the new facilitator should build into the agenda?
I just want to go back one, Pat. Even though you're not facilitating, I sincerely hope you still attend the collaborative meetings.
Thanks. Yet to be determined.
Okay.
Want to give the new facilitator a lot of space. So anyway, any agenda items for January?
And maybe put the illegal grows back on.
Yeah.
That we need to follow up with. I'll get with Susan and I'll try to reach out to Tim Saxon.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And is there anything like from the Shasta T side that is available to be shared out? I know that we've also had some, in the past, we've had some participation, I know from the Six River side, to talk about those issues. And I don't know who, you know, like handles
law
LEO.
enforcement.
Yeah, the LEO kind of end of things. Tara, do you happen to have any knowledge of how that might work?
I can reach out and just invite, tell them the topic at hand and see if I can get our local LEO on board to attend. Matt Swanson's our local LEO on that side, or Logan from the South Fork side. So I'll see if I can get somebody to come to the meeting and be ready to talk about that issue. And that seems more than reasonable and certainly important information we should be talking about.
Okay,
great. Thank you, Tara.
So one thing I brought up at the Fire Safe Council meeting yesterday is it possible to have a coordination meeting for all the projects in the North Lake area? Because we have Trinity Camps, we have the McConnell Foundation project, we have the application to the Sierra Nevada Conservancy that does the roads. We have potentially stuff, you know, proposal to do Highway 3. I just
Bowerman Ridge.
A Bowerman Ridge fuel break. I'm just trying to figure out, you know, it seems to me beneficial to have a meeting, and I'm not sure if the collaborative would be the sponsor or who, but to kind of like, okay, you're doing this here, you're doing that there. You need implementation money. you're okay with implementation money. You need more help to do the environmental documentation. The PUD's RAP project, what information there could, help people. And I'm just like, I see all these different pieces and I'm not seeing that, I have identified some gaps when I met with Xander Winter at the Watershed Center, but I'm not seeing that the players have actually gotten together and said, who's doing what and who needs, what information can we share and all that. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that like a collaborative activity or what do you, I don't know.
I mean, it kind of seems like it's kind of a collaborative / fire safe council kind of getting together.
I don't know, from my perspective, that might be more appropriate with the fire safe council.
I agree.
Yeah.
Fire Senate Council, I think.
So more sponsored by the fire safe council is kind of the, from over here.
Okay, well then I'll see
Work
if
with Amelia.
Amelia, yeah, I'll check with Amelia. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
But Carol mentioned the PUD project. That might be a nice thing to reach out to them and have an update at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
Good suggestion. Okay, well, if there's nothing else for anybody, we're done an hour early.
The perfect way to end a facilitator's career.
Yeah, great way to end my career.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what you'll be remembered for, Pat.
Yeah. Okay,
Thanks.
well, anyway, everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving with whoever you're going to share that with. And if I don't see some of you before, have great Christmas and New Year's.
Thank you, Pat.
Back
Thank
at
you,
you.
everyone.
Jennifer, Mama,
Thank
get that turkey over to the school.
It's done. It's resting.
It's resting. Okay.
Thing before carving. Thanks, everybody. Have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job.
You do need the socks. You're not even wearing any.
No, I can't put any on.
Oh, but those will work.